Yo, what's going on, Latin Wealth family? Welcome to another episode to the Latin Wealth Podcast. Very excited about today's episode because we have another phenomenal entrepreneur on the podcast today. A little bit about our guest. He is the co-founder of Chiki Chiki Boom Boom, which is a food and beverage company, and he's drinking the product as we're speaking right now. We'll get more into it. Product placement. He's also been in the fashion industry for many, many years, which helping launching some massive brands such as Young and Reckless, Manello Club, New Republic, and a couple other big ones that we'll jump into. Yeah, I'm excited about this conversation. We're gonna definitely dive into his story, all his entrepreneurial experience and whatnot. Welcome to the podcast, Andres. How you doing today, bro?
I'm great. Great. Thank you for having me.
Yes, sir. Thank you for coming on the podcast. You know, I think I was listening to one of your other episodes, and I think you said something like you've always been an entrepreneur. I think straight out of college, you never really had a corporate job, a regular job. Have you ever been curious about a different career path, or like working a corporate job or something like that, or has that ever interested you, and you're just like, nah, I've always been an
Yeah, yeah,
entrepreneur?
I yeah, I think when I interned in college, at the time I thought I wanted to go into entertainment. So I
Okay.
had some opportunities to intern at Warner Brothers and 20th Century Fox and different departments from music to film. And they were cool, and I learned a lot, but I didn't really like the structure, and I was just like, damn, it's gonna take me like 20 to 25 years to get to the top.
Yeah.
That's a pretty long road because I'd seen, I'd read about all like the CEOs, and
Yeah.
these guys were in their 50s, 60s, very rarely in their 40s. And, I saw
Yeah.
their trajectories, and it was like they worked and worked and worked. And I'm like, dude, I didn't, really want to go down that path. And
Yeah.
I had great bosses, but I just didn't like being told what to do. So, I knew I
Yeah.
had to strike off on my own and do my own
Yeah.
thing.
I'm curious, were you weren't officially an employee, but were you a hard worker back then, or were you always like, I kind of want to do my own thing? What type of worker were you back then?
Yeah, I mean, I
Employee.
think,
Yeah.
yeah, when I was an employee, I was always very curious, and I
Mhm.
wanted just to learn, and I love to learn and just be like a sponge. So, I think I was pretty, my only fault, not my only, I mean, I have many faults, but like one of my employee faults that I had is I think I was like always a little late. I wasn't like
Oh,
tragically late. I was like 5 to 15 minutes late on
yeah.
average. But I would stay an hour, 2 hour, 3 hour extra as an
Yeah.
intern just because I wanted to learn. Like there were some days where I
Yeah.
would stay till 8, 9, 10 p.m. just because I was so hungry. So, I think, for me, and eventually when I was graduating, I was offered a full-time job, but I was just like, dude, there's no way
Yeah.
I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
But yeah, just the curiosity's always been there,
Yeah, absolutely. Don't The only reason why I asked that is because I've heard people say like if you're a terrible employee, you're probably gonna be a great entrepreneur. But then I've also heard like, hey, if you're a terrible employee, what makes you think you can be a good entrepreneur, right? If you can't,
Yeah, yeah.
if,
Well,
go ahead. Yeah,
no. I think it depends on like what
yeah,
your faults are.
yeah.
Like being late, sure, it's always good to be like on time or a little early,
Mhm.
like without a doubt. I don't want to blame me being Latino and us being always late as a culture,
Right, right,
but
right.
I think apart from that, I was always very, very curious. I always had, I brought
Mhm.
different ideas to the table. That's why I was always allowed to kind of sit in the rooms with like the VPs and
Mhm.
stuff like that, where as an intern, a lot of people didn't have that kind of access. And I was pretty fortunate that I had some people that believed in my ability. So, I think being curious is always super important because,
Yeah.
especially at a young age, like don't be afraid to ask questions. So I think like, the the point back of like, because I've had now through my years, I've had employees that have call it been say good and maybe not the best employees, and then gone and tried to do their own thing. I think based on from my recollection, the ones with the most success are the ones that not necessarily were the best employees, but like they always tried and they put
Mm-hmm.
effort and they asked questions and they were curious, and they put in the extra hours. So, I think that if you have those characteristics, say like a bad employee doesn't mean that you question things. That's just you being curious, or maybe you having a different idea, of the way it should be done because your perspective may be unique to the circumstance, right? So I think it just depends how you see it. I always try to view things from a positive
Mm-hmm.
manner. So like it depends. It's all in like the light of the beholder, right? If your
Mm-hmm.
boss is like, if they're a certain way and they're a corporate person and you have an entrepreneurial spirit, they're going to probably find something that's negative to classify you as like a bad employee. But if like me as an entrepreneur, I've always been able to tell like who are the go-getters, the self-starters. That person one day is going to be very successful, and I've had that feeling with certain people. Nothing wrong with if
Mm-hmm.
you're not that either. Maybe we all need great superstar employees. Not everyone can be the founder, visionary, blah 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 blah. Because
I love
they
that.
can do things better than I can in some circumstances.
Yeah.
So I guess it just depends on the person and like who is the boss. You
Yeah,
know.
absolutely, absolutely. And we'll get into. I'm curious of like where this positive mindset comes from and this entrepreneurial spirit comes from. But how do you deal with maybe you having a superstar employee and they end up wanting to leave the company?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times, whenever I've had that, I mean, most of the times it's been because they've wanted to pursue something maybe bigger.
Yeah,
And, I always encourage that because at the end of the day, especially with creative people, you can't push them too hard because creative
yeah.
people need refreshing and new beginnings. It's the journey of creativity. So I fully support it. So most of the times I haven't really pushed like, hey, yo, stay on board, blah, blah, blah,
Mm,
because when you're mentally checked out of something, sometimes you're just mentally checked out of something.
that's
And
it.
that goes towards an entrepreneur too. Sometimes there's moments in your career where you're just like over it because maybe you've
Mm,
either put in so much work, it didn't
yeah.
realize the way that you expected, and at some point you have to call it a loss and be able to like progress to your next thing. Not
Mm,
necessarily call it a loss per se, but like, cool, that was the end of that chapter. I'm moving on to the next chapter, you
love
know?
that. Love that. So where did this walk us through your background and you growing up? Where did this positive mindset come from? And where did this entrepreneurial spirit come from as well?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm born and raised in LA. My family's from
Mm,
Ecuador. I come from divorced parents. They divorced when I was 2, so I grew up being raised by my mom, my two
mm,
aunts, and my grandma. And we're that side of the family. They're half Latin, half Lebanese. So you can
mm.
the tension
Interesting.
was hot always. A lot of they only spoke Spanish at home. So I learned a lot just from kind of being in that environment.
Mm,
My father was an entrepreneur his whole life, and I would
mm,
see him on the weekends till the age of 10 or so. So I always saw kind of how he wine, dine, razzle dazzled, and I always thought it was really cool. And then just like growing up, I had access. I mean, this is back in the 80s, right? Like TV was pretty much your
mm.
only medium of information. And I would just love watching like 60
Mm.
Minutes in 2020 when it was like
Interesting.
about the entrepreneur, so, I was just very curious, and I was fortunate enough to go. My mother always put education as like the number one priority. So even though, when my father left the United States when I was 9 or 10, we didn't have the means that we used to have when he was around. And but my mother always put education and told me like the only
Mm,
equalizer in life is education.
yeah. Mm,
And she made it very poignant that I
mm,
needed to study, and it was like ingrained from my grandma to my aunts that like I needed to do well in school, because if I didn't do well in school I wasn't allowed to, I don't know, go on vacation
mm,
or play with my friends or play video games or whatever, right? So like, with that in mind, I, was exposed to private schooling my entire life. And, I was around a lot of people that had better means than me. And I always like aspired like shit, they have an amazing lifestyle. Not like money defines success or happiness, but it allows you to do a lot of cool things that you may
Mm,
not do if you don't
100%.
have the means, right? So with that, I always was exposed, to these other people that, were successful and that had more means. And I always use my ambition
Mm,
and those kind of experiences and the wonderful people that I met on my journey as inspiration slash fuel to be able to keep progressing
mm,
to something greater. And I always thought big. Sometimes it's good and bad to think big because my problem I think sometimes in my life is I've only thought like too big. And
mm,
sometimes you have to understand that getting to that big moment, you know, it's like it's like you walking to China. Good
mm.
luck getting there. There's an ocean in between. Like figure it out, bro. So in that kind of mindset, I think I've learned through the years, like, okay, great. Like, having the vision is important because if you want to build something big and convince people to work with you and convince investors to invest in you, and then ultimately convince your customers and your end consumers to buy your products, you have to show a big vision and a big path,
Mm.
right? But understanding that like the road to get there, it's going to be complicated and it's going to be
Mm.
filled with more failures and success. But if you're able to weather the storm, that's all that matters.
So I'm curious, with you being a big thinker, big vision, you know what I'm saying? You see the top of the mountain type of person. Do you think if you would have known the steps to get to the mountain, to get to your vision, to get to your goals, you think you would have still went through the process? Right? Because
Yeah,
I look,
yeah, uh-huh.
okay. Now I was just gonna say,
No, no,
because
go, go.
there's like you said, there's a lot of trials, there's a lot of tribulation, and a part of maybe succeeding to get to that top of the mountain is you being naive enough to not even know what's next, right? Because for some people, if they did know the steps, they did know what it takes, it would scare a lot of people off. Like, I got to go
Yeah,
through all, I got to walk across the ocean to get to China. I'm not doing that, right? But
yeah, yeah,
if
yeah.
you almost like didn't know the steps, you just take it one step at a time, right?
Yeah, no, totally. I think the difference between, say, myself as an entrepreneur and a lot of other entrepreneurs that whether or not, like every journey is different, but I would say that maybe my thing that, and I don't like regret anything, but maybe like having a little bit of experience in that field
Mm,
would have been key, even if it's 2 years of working at it, because it's way cheaper to make mistakes on someone else's dime than on your dime. So I
100%.
think that despite whatever success I've accomplished, it took a little bit longer than it may have some other people that I'm friends with, say in the fashion business and whatnot, because they worked 2 to 10 years somewhere, and then when they
Mm,
were in their 30s, then they launched their idea, but they had all this experience of
yeah.
learning on someone else's dime. I've only learned on my dime, and I've never been exposed,
Yeah.
to learning something on someone else's dime and then doing it on my own, right?
Right.
So I think that that's the only caveat. So,
Hmm.
in theory, to a certain extent, if I were to start something again, if I worked in that field for like, even if it's just 1 to 2 years, I will know a ton more than going into something so naive and blind, you know?
100%. Yeah.
Um,
Love that.
so I think like that's the way I see it. Bear in mind, if I knew the steps, obviously, I think the only difference is I would make less mistakes,
Mm,
make it would cost me less money, and I would do it in a faster amount of time because now I know what it takes to be successful in
right.
one industry. What are the do's and the don'ts, and then now that I made this transition into a new industry, I started from scratch. I didn't know anyone,
Hmm.
so it was like going from a certain level in fashion to kind of starting
Yeah.
all anew. And sure, domain expertise only applies to a certain extent,
Yeah.
so I think that whatever, my journey is my journey. I don't know how to
Yeah.
change it, like
Yeah.
I can only try my best.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's important is to to just to understand, or just to have the awareness to know if you actually enjoys your journey, if you're enjoying the process, right? Like you say, your journey is your journey, and that's perfectly fine as long as you're enjoying it, right? As long as you're going through the
Yeah.
process, right? So, but I'm curious. So you got introduced to the fashion industry, and you were in the industry for about 19, 20 years, if I'm not mistaken. You help launch over 10 brands, and these aren't just like little brands, these are very successful brands. What got you into the fashion industry? And yeah, talk to us about, you launched 5-4, the 5-4 group. Talk to us about that process as well.
Yeah, so like I always was pretty obsessed with clothing since I was a kid, probably since
Mhm.
I was like 4 years old. And a lot of my friends, their parents would pick out their clothes. I would pick out my own clothes. I would go to the mall with my mom. I would tell her yes to this, no to that, and yeah, as I got into high school and obviously I was able to make my own decisions. We had a uniform, but it was very loose. It was just like collar, shirt, and khakis. So
Mm,
for me, it was like, can I get the freshest collar, shirt, and
mm,
khakis? So my mom only allowed me to shop at TJ Maxx and Marshall and Ross. So, but I would pick out the hot Tommy, Polo, Nautica, and I was just like, I'm gonna put together my fresh. So like, as I progressed into college, um, at that time I thought I wanted to go into entertainment, and then you know, through that journey, I was able to meet some people that were pretty powerful in entertainment whenever I had like a school project. Uh, I went to USC in LA, and I I thought I wanted to be a talent agent, and I was
mm,
able to meet like four very powerful people in the agency world that were like at the top of their field.
mm.
That for like an intern, it was like kind of impossible to get these meetings, but I was able to, the gift of the gab, get
Yeah,
the
get in
meeting,
there.
and these are ultra successful people that manage the careers of the most famous people in the world.
Mm,
And one of them asked me, like, do you like doing this? Do you like doing that? And I told him, no, no, no. And he said, then you are not going to make a good agent.
mm.
And I was just like, yeah. And then I walked out of that meeting. I was like, fuck that. I never want to be like in those scenarios
Yeah,
that
yeah.
they told me. I want to be 100% control of my destiny as opposed
Mm,
to it being reliant on if talent liked it or not, or if that morning
right.
they felt good or bad. So anyway, so in that same vein, um, you know, I think sorry, what was the question
No,
again? I'm
no,
going off
no,
on
no,
like a
you're good.
tangent.
So, yeah, you're walking us through the process of how you got into the
Okay,
fashion
okay,
industry.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah.
then, yeah, my bad. So then, like the summer of 21, 21, Jesus, 2001, I was 20 years old, 20, 21 years old. Uh, I was in New York, and I walked into the store called H&M, and it was like the
Mm,
first one in America, or the first two or three in America on Fifth Ave.
really?
And I spent like $800.
The
Bear in
one that's
mind.
still there
Yeah, it's probably
in
still
Times
there.
Square?
No, Fifth Ave somewhere. I
Fifth,
think
Fifth
more
Ave, got you.
Upper East Side, like probably like in the 50s.
That's crazy.
Um, so anyway, so like I went in there, I spent like, I don't know, 700, $800. And I was with
Dang.
my friend, and he bought like a jacket. And I was just like, damn, the clothes are hot. Like, it looked like the things that were like on runway, but cheaper. And
Mm,
up to that point, Americans didn't really have exposure to fast fashion. It was more like classic clothing
mm,
done in a cheaper manner, right? But
interesting.
trend wasn't so irrelevant,
Yeah.
and I would always like go online on the internet. This was like when the internet wasn't as good, right? And kind of see like the European and the Japanese fashion. And I saw
Mm,
those glimpses at H&M. And then I needed to write a school project. I was now in the entrepreneur program my senior year at USC, and I decided to write a concept around a fast fashion retailer, with my friend and co-founder.
mm,
And then, we were like, dude, this is gonna be impossible to launch a retail store. Like we don't know how to source or anything. Let's launch a brand. It's a lot easier. So then
mm.
like we looked in like the yellow pages. This is when the yellow pages were
Wow.
of
The
relevancy.
yellow pages.
Yeah. Like the big yellow books,
Yeah. Yeah.
like and then we just were like, hey, let's find like we didn't even know what screen printing was.
Oh,
We
that's
thought it was like
crazy.
t-shirt printing. So I just like looked
Yeah.
in the t-shirt section, because you couldn't Google these things. Like now everyone's a designer and a streetwear designer
You
entrepreneur,
you can
dude.
get
But back
everything you need
then,
on TikTok.
yeah, back then the ecosystem was tight. The internet wasn't as good. So it was like kind of very challenging to
Oh
figure
yeah.
this out. That's why there were so few brands back then. To put in perspective, if say back then there was like 10,000 brands, today there's probably a million brands. So just to
Hmm.
understand like the the difference back then, and the access to information was close to impossible.
Right.
So, whatever, we launched, we got into like some stores in LA. I used to throw parties in college. So we launched like a launch party, had 2,000 people there. This is off of like a flyer and word of
Mm.
mouth. And I didn't even know they had SMS back then. I was like on two-way pagers, like the Motorola two-way page me. And
Wow.
just texting people. When I had 2,000 people show up, I'm like, damn, it's fucking hot. And then we got into like, I don't know, 10 accounts by graduation, got into like 7 magazines. This one being in a physical magazine was of
Mhm.
relevancy. It was better to be in a magazine then than online. Go
Wow.
figure. So then
Crazy.
graduated, and then my co-founder and I were like, hey, what do we do? Like, do we get a job, or do we go like do this? So we maxed out credit cards, went to a trade
Mm.
show, failed, kept failing, but we built like a hype and like a little buzz. And then we ended up had like a breakout year by like call it 2005. We
Mhm.
started to make clothing, and I went to Peru for like 2 weeks to
Mm.
like make like soft Pima cotton hoodies and blah 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 blah.
Wow.
Ended up like finally getting some momentum, got an investor, and then like that next year, like the company blew up, went from call it a few hundred grand in sales to like 6 million like in one year. So we were like, yeah, we're hot. And then I learned how to make jeans, so we got
Mm.
very good at making jeans. And you know, I was in Europe at a show, like I don't even know the show exists anymore, called Bread and Butter. It was like this hot European
Mm.
fashion trade show of brands. And I noticed this trend that like all the dudes were wearing like slim jeans. And I
Mhm.
thought it was cool. And in America, it was like boot cut and relaxed and
Mhm.
straight leg at most. Straight leg was like the tightest jean, but it was still kind of baggy, right?
Yeah.
And I always was like, I like sneakers, and I was just like, baggy jeans may cover your sneakers so it doesn't show the
Mhm.
shoe. So like one day I decided to take, we had only 2 styles, like a straight leg and a relaxed. And I took the relaxed, and I literally didn't tell anyone. I just did whatever I
Mhm.
wanted. A good and bad idea.
Mhm.
I It was a 19-inch leg opening. Bear in mind, in like the streetwear and like men's street fashion market at the time, the common leg opening was like 20 to 22, literally like that
Mhm.
big.
Yep.
It's
Yep.
it's it's asinine to think, right?
Yeah.
And I took it. Ours was 19, so it was already progressive. I took it down to like a 17,
Mhm.
and we had like furious retailers. What are you doing? My co-founder was like, dude, they're all like yelling at me because he's the one that led the sales. And I was just like, dude, just trust me. Like, just put the thing on the floor. Like, it's about the sneaker. This is going to glorify the sneaker. That's what dudes that wear streetwear want. Because if anything, the sneaker is the most relevant talking point of their outfit, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Boom. We all of a sudden became like the hottest selling brand in
Wow.
denim in a lot of these stores, and then, we then created multiple styles. And we were one of the first, if not the first men's fashion brand that did like jeans with stretch for like the streetwear
Mhm.
market,
What
and
was
this
the
was
name
like
of the
in two
brand?
by four, and this is in 2007, like 16 years ago, men wearing stretch jeans is like
That's
also
crazy.
insane with small, and then we progressed the leg openings down to like 15, 14 inches, which today is kind of big, because dudes are wearing jeans that are like,
Mhm.
if they're slim jeans, you're thinking more like a 12 to like a 14.
Mhm.
But, in that, so we achieved success, then the recession hit. Um, in '08, we launched another brand called Young and Reckless at the time. We were
Mhm.
fortunate enough to meet this dude named Drama that was on a MTV show called Rob Dyrdek, Fantasy Factory, and he wanted to launch a show, or sorry,
Mhm.
a brand on
Yep.
the show. So my partner D and I got together, and we basically like shotgun this brand, produced. I mean, it was only like t-shirts and stuff, but it was like the number one most Googled term in North
Wow.
America on the date that like it came out, like
Wow.
on air on MTV. So we saw
Wow.
like the power of celebrity and collaboration and media and all that stuff. And in that whole journey, a few years progressed. I was at the mall, and there was a like a what do you call it? Like a meet and greet for this girl that wasn't that famous at the time, but I knew her
Mm.
forever, called Kim Kardashian, right? So she's my age, and she went to my sister's school, right? And she was dating Reggie Bush at the time. She went to school called Marymount. I went to school called Loyola, and I had met
Yeah.
her a few times, but wasn't, was like, hey, what's up? Like, whatever. But she was very well known because her dad was Bob Kardashian, was
Hmm.
OJ's attorney and
Yeah.
his
Yeah.
his his friend, right? That's what she was famous for, like prior to her being famous for what she is now, right?
Right.
At
Right.
least in the LA scene, everyone knew who she was. So we were talking to her and Bob Shapiro, which was OJ's lawyer, and I was friends with his kids, and he was telling us about this concept called shoe dazzle, and how they use the power of the celebrity being Kim
Hmm.
in this case, and females were subscribing to shoes, and it was like $39 a month or something. And they had a pop up, a meet and greet at the mall at Century City at the
Hmm.
Westfield, and we had a pop up store right around their pop up, and we were just talking, and I think they needed to take her into our store because the security needed, because the line was long, so they
Right.
needed
Right.
to put her somewhere safe. So then that's when we chatted with her, and she was dating Reggie Bush at the time, and Reggie went to SC, and she would buy clothing for Reggie or her
Hmm.
assistant online because we were very popular with the USC players, right? So
Hmm.
all these dots are
Right.
connecting, right?
Connect.
But more importantly, she told us this idea of shoe dazzle, and it was popping, and I was like, wow, that's like pretty interesting. Like I think the difference, for if you apply this to men, is that men don't want to shop. They don't care to shop. At least like the average dude,
Right. Right.
they
Right.
want it kind of easy. They want it curated, and the bigger opportunities to do something
Mm.
that's a bit more price sensitive. So then we launched this concept called the 5-4 Club, like
Mm.
May 7, 2012. Yeah, 2012. Shit, that's like 10 and a half years ago, almost 11 now. So we launched that, and then that thing, like the day one, we had like 1,200 members. We're like, damn, there's
Wow.
obviously a demand. Uh, my my
So
co-founder was able to get it placed on television,
yeah.
and we got like this crazy skyrocket that first day, and then from then it kind of like exploded. So yeah, and then throughout time, through like, call it over the next 5 years, we launched about 6 to 8 more brands. I forget the number. Some were successful, some failed.
Yeah.
But yeah,
So wow, that's I mean, I can sit here and listen to you talk about fashion probably for a couple hours because it's just really interesting to see how far it's came and you just being innovative and trying new things, right? So the 5-4 brand that you launched, you was it like you said it was a subscription brand. So what how did that work back then? Like you just subscribe and you get sent different products like a package. Maybe you pick out like what your style is. Was it something like that?
yeah. It was like a quiz.
Okay.
Like
I
again, we kept
remember.
it
Yeah, I
simple.
remember. Okay. Yeah.
We
Yeah.
we we kept it simple because guys didn't want to be too overburdened with too many questions that
Right.
were more subjective, right? So most of the questions were objective, like height, waist,
Mm.
shoe size, uh, top size, whatever, blah blah blah. And then we asked questions like, do you like what fit do you like in your denim? What top do you like? What style are you like? Classic, forward, or
Mm.
casual? So based on that, we were able to build these like profiles and then curate a package of like 2 to 3 items a month. And obviously the concept tweaked over time, but that was like, I don't know, 90% of what we did day one hasn't really changed to
Mm.
this day. Um, and yeah, and that's what basically how the idea evolved, and
Mm. No,
and yeah,
it's a really interesting business model. Like I'm just thinking, I think it would definitely work nowadays. Like that's something that could the
yeah. I
model.
mean,
Yeah.
yeah, the business exists to this still to this day.
Yeah.
I think the difference between, say, now and then is that now fashion is more. I feel the pandemic changed the behavior of people where
Hmm.
they started to value things and maintain things more. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe the urge of like consumer spending isn't as there anymore, at least on fashion, because at least for like the men's sector, because you didn't really use many new clothes for like a year and a half. There was
Yeah.
not a need. Maybe some sweatpants and some like comfortable slippers, but beyond that, there wasn't this need to like, buy the new whatever,
Yeah.
Comme des Garçons or the new, Supreme this or that or whatever, right? So, I think that behaviors change. And there's just a lot more options now that exist. A lot of it is because, there's a lot more brands in the marketplace. So
Mm-hmm.
if you think that something cool or like merch now is hot, back then merch wasn't really a thing. Like meaning company merch, artist merch,
Mm-hmm.
merch in general. A lot of merch you bought was more like old rock vintage tees. Now
Mm-hmm.
merch itself is like a category that's billions
It's
of
the thing.
dollars.
Yeah.
Whether it's again music, company, influencer, et cetera, et cetera. So now there's just a lot more disposable income options where you could like, to spend your cash. That's
Yeah.
more of like an impulsive buy, maybe tied into a moment or an event or like, you know, some sort of influencer or
Yeah.
something of that sort.
So I'm curious. So over the years of launching all those brands, did you kind of develop a system where you knew worked for you guys, or was every single brand different? Like what you did with Young and
Yeah,
Reckless, what you know what I'm saying?
every brand is different, and I think that the
Interesting.
failure was that we tried to apply a system, and the system
Oh.
failed when we tried to use the same formula. I think the biggest thing is that you need to do as a fashion entrepreneur, and it's irrelevant to this day, is where is the opportunity? Categorically, what is missing? What's the price sensitivity of the audience? Is there some sort of innovation or function that your product has that doesn't exist right now, and why do men need it? Is it something that's easy to communicate? Is it visually something different? Um, are you able, most brands now, the success of a brand today is driven by direct to consumer. Is it
Mm.
something where you have the margin to be able to ship, right? Can you achieve a 75-point margin and up? Because remember, you have to ship the product and then you also have to probably buy ads against it. So your
Mm-hmm.
ROAS, your return on ad spend, needs to be at a certain multiple for you to say your cost of goods sold, your shipping cost, and your advertising cost. And
Mm-hmm.
if all those match and you still net 30%, great. You're in damn good shape. But if those don't add up and you're either netting under 10%, or you're breaking even or you're losing, then it's probably a bad
Mm.
idea,
Yeah.
you know? So you need to think
Mm.
about that, and also like that's more like the optics and the
Mm.
objectivity of the brand. From a subjectivity, the success of your brand, again, in my opinion, needs to tie back into some sort of community. Like,
Mm.
who is your audience? How
That's
can
big.
the advertising, your ROAS, that the difference between your ROAS being maybe a 2x to like a 8x, maybe because you have an engaging platform or you've connected with a community that's so tight and easy to talk to.
Yeah.
Is it an emotion that they're clinging to your brand to? Is it, I don't know, is it like an ethnic thing? Is it tied
Mm-hmm.
in, like, for instance, like I see a lot of success in beauty brands now that they're being tied into like a race, right? So
Mm.
this product works well for the Latin com- community because
Yeah.
their hair quality is a certain thing that
Mm-hmm.
this ingredient, works with that,
Interesting.
or the African American community, et cetera, et cetera. That makes your advertising easier, right? Because then your scope of who you're targeting is a little bit more narrow. So
Narrow.
it helps
Yep.
with your communications, helps with your ad creative, your audience segmentation, your communication, your verbal things that you write. Like, what is that community going to engage with? What do I say? Who are the collaborators? What are the models that I need to use? Are they tall? Are they short? Are they skinny? Are they medium? Are they bigger?
Mm.
Whatever, blah, blah, blah. So like I'm having a really good understanding
Mm.
of what your end consumer is and then how you're going to communicate to them and what is the emotion that you are going to strike with that consumer is like
Mm-hmm.
the hardest part, because everything else you can figure
Mm-hmm.
out like on the internet, you
Yeah.
know, or you can ask, or you can change your pricing to be a little bit higher to achieve the margins. So,
Yeah.
I think the beauty of that today versus call it 20 years ago, those pillars may not have existed in such a quantitative manner. Now you can kind of quantify everything, and
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot more outlets to figure out, like
Mm-hmm.
I believe online fashion is fucked in terms
Mm-hmm.
of like you can't have a really big scalable concept. However, the caveat to that is if you can tie into a community where you can build
Mm-hmm.
an emotional relationship to them and that community is really large, then that is how you can build like $1 billion brand.
Mm-hmm.
But again, those are few and far between, because when you start doing it well, someone's going to copy you. So like what is the relationship that you have with that end consumer? That's like the most important thing, in my opinion.
Man, that was powerful. So have you ever thought about writing a book, a fashion book?
Uh, I've thought about it, but I don't know. I'm kind of
Bro, because
like
you are
I'm
just
kind of
such
over
a
it.
he said I'm over it. You just are such a wealth of knowledge when it comes to that category. It's almost crazy to think about like what even made you want to transition, I think is the next question to ask from
Yeah.
fashion into food and beverage. Was it like you just mentioned you're kind of over it, were you just burnt out? Were you just ready for a new challenge? What was it that made you switch? That's
Yeah, I think like back then in 2017 when we had our biggest year, I didn't see how this thing can evolve into something like $1 billion idea. And it's not
mm,
about the money, but like it's about the impact, and it's
mm,
about the reach, and it's about innovation. So if you don't see, or at least for me, if I don't see, like I could be doing $10 million or $5 million in sales and be really happy if I saw this like big picture that I'm like, I see me getting there, right?
mm,
The way that the business change of it going all direct to consumer and so many options, and I mean it's great because now there's like a bigger ecosystem of creative thinkers in it. The challenge is that the pot didn't necessarily get bigger; it just got more
mm,
fragmented, right?
mm,
And since fashion is so disposable and it's a luxury item, like meaning you don't need to buy another t-shirt. It's a desire, it's a want. Like, oh yeah, that whatever, like that Comme des Garçons or that Supreme shirt, that's hot. But do you really need it? Probably not, because you probably got like,
yeah.
like I have like 700-800 pair of shoes. Do I need to buy another pair of shoes? Probably not, like ever, right? But like, so in that vein, like I didn't see that one that is like how can becoming bigger create more impact, and I didn't
Mm,
see the ability to become bigger. One. Two, tied into impact. How can I impact? How can I create something that is impactful in the world from a positive perspective? How can I integrate climate change into
mm,
what I'm doing? I started reading a lot about the environment and sustainability, and like seeing like what is my role in all this? Like
mm,
how can I create impact? Our fashion company wasn't necessarily built to be a
for sure.
eco-friendly brand, because sure, they're great ideas, but unless your like DNA and your infrastructure is built from day one to the material level, and everyone being on board from your investors to C-suite and blah blah blah, even the way that you hire like people that all share that same vision, it's difficult to turn a ship and say like, hey, we're going to do all these
Mm,
things. And then also the availability and the ease of your raw materials being accessible to create environmentally friendly fashion based products. It's traditionally been more expensive.
mm,
So
yeah.
when you're working in a cost sensitive market, because our price point was more like mid tier, you know, going up 10 to 15% in costs is like, it's a big effect on your bottom line, so it may not, your consumer may not reward
Mm,
you with their desire to pay more for that item, right?
yeah.
So I think that
100%.
that was a part of the problem. So I started to look and see like, where can I create impact? And another thing that I was inspired for is like, how can I impact my culture? and
Mm.
how can I create something cool that my Latino people can
Mm-hmm.
aspire to, that
Talk
they
about
can
it.
see something that like represents the culture. So those are like the two biggest things that to me like culture and impact from like a sustainability perspective that really drove me. And I started to look and see like where can I use my domain expertise from doing all this stuff in fashion and apply it to something else. Okay, it's probably gonna be some sort of a consumer product, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
I started seeing like what is something that you need to be doing every day? You need to eat every day, right? You
Mm.
need to eat
That's
what, 3 to 4
interesting.
meals a day, drink 6 to 8 times a day. Sure, it's mainly water, but like cool. So then that's where like my head naturally
Mm.
went to. And being a byproduct of like I always say, I speak 3 fluent languages: English, Spanish, and Spanglish. And, being heavily influenced by rap and hip hop in the 90s and
Mm-hmm.
2000s, and a lot of my brands in the fashion space, like we did a lot of collaborations
Mm-hmm.
with personalities in those spaces, and a lot of our say brand marketing success was attributable to collaborations with rappers and all that stuff. you know I naturally saw like this like white space where I'm like, dude, reggaeton is going to be the new hip hop, and Latin culture is becoming pop culture. And the like based on the statistics, like 22% of millennials are Latin, 26% of Gen Z is Latin, 30% of teenagers are Latin. I'm like, dude, these numbers are like crazy,
They're
right?
there.
And there's this first generation Latino Latino audience in the United States that identifies as like a 200% or like 100% Latin, 100% American. And I'm like, I'm that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I feel that. And I don't feel like there's products that represent me. But now there's like culturally iconic figures that kind of look like me in the sense, like, look and talk like me, like, right? Like, I'm seeing someone rapping in Spanish that's like dope, and they're
Yeah.
dressed dope. And like, I'm not saying they look like me per se, but like I identify,
Mm-hmm.
meaning like,
You
oh,
identify.
I'm
Yeah.
the same, you
Yeah.
know, culture, right? So that was like transformational, where now like that started to become the new cool. And I said, like, dude, in the next like 5 to 10 years, reggaeton is going to be the biggest movement that we're going to
Mm-hmm.
see. This is like in 2016, I started seeing this. Um,
Wow.
that is going to impact the culture, and it's going to be cross cultural, right? Because Latin culture is very fun. It's exciting. It's very inclusive, and just in general, like if you live in a big city in America, you're probably impacted by Latin culture directly or indirectly, right? Because we're in all the big
Very true.
metros, and
Very
we
true.
love to we love to breed. So your Latin homie is probably a family of 3 to 5 kids versus your non-Latin, wasn't a little
Mm.
more responsible, and they're like 1 to 2 kids, right? So then you're starting to see that, and dude, all of a sudden, like maybe 50% of your friends are Latin in
Yeah.
like the big cities, right? So like I'm starting to see that there's this missing gap in the food
Mm.
and beverage space of like forward thinking, cool vibes, like zeitgeisty, irreverent kind of brand way of thinking that you saw heavily in fashion and streetwear and all that stuff that I had done personally and had done like hundreds of collabs in my lifetime. And I'm like, dude, this is like going to be the opportunity in this space. And I'd seen it specifically in food and beverage, particularly in beverage, in like vitamin water with hip hop,
Mm-hmm.
Celsius with hip hop,
Yeah.
Bai with pop music. And at the
Yeah.
time, there was this new brand popping up in like 2018, 19 called Liquid Death. And they were
Mm-hmm.
doing it more in like the punk, rock, metal kind of space, where I'm like, dude, these guys are like, they're hitting the subculture
Yeah.
in such a hard way that's so dope that it's
Crazy.
touching the emotion of that consumer. I'm like, yo, again, the Latino, like they want that. They're dying for like
Mm-hmm.
dying, right? And no one's giving it to them. And the only thing that, if anything, they're being given is the natural granola yoga mom vibe, but with a little Latinidad. That is not like, sure, maybe that identifies with some people, but like, give me reggaeton. Give
Yeah.
me that shit that like we
Yeah.
over index. Give me the thing that we listen to 8 to 10 hours a day. Like, can the communication be centric around that? I mean, I listen to reggaeton like 8 to 10 hours a day. I
Mm.
figure a lot of my friends do, which they do, right? So like, I was like 0.005% top listeners of Bad Bunny last year. And I played like 40,000 minutes on Spotify of Bad Bunny. I'm like, yo, there's a lot of people
Wow.
like me that
Yeah.
identify with this like obsession with this. And then all my friends that I talk to, at least the majority of my Latin friends, reggaeton is like 80, 90% of their Spotify or their Apple Music. So I was just like, dude, this is just like a glaring opportunity. So then, you know, that's when I decided like, yo, I got to go into this. This is the way where I'm going to be able to breed like culture,
Yeah.
community, sustainability, social impact, health, wellness, and more importantly, like
And
reggaeton
yeah,
as the like as like the as the as the
amplifier.
plate, as
Yeah,
the
play. There you
amplifier
go.
slash plate of all these ingredients. So yeah, so that's how I landed on Chiki Chiki Boom Boom.
So we'll jump into the ingredients, like what goes into the bottle and everything. But I'm just sitting here, and we have like I think about 10 more minutes, so I want to give you time to dive into that. But I'm sitting here like really inspired by how you analyze what our people need or what people need, right? You're asking these
Yeah,
really insightful questions like, okay, what do you said, what do people need? That people need to eat and drink. Okay, that's where my mind went. How many times do people drink a day? What are they drinking, right? What's available to our community? So I'm really inspired by the questions that you're asking to create a product, because most people, they go out and they create what they think people need. They don't ask the questions of what the consumer is looking for, what's already out there. They just kind of put out, I think this is what they need. And sometimes it works. But I love the fact that you're taking a step back and saying, okay, what are our basic necessities? And you're asking those, again, those very insightful questions to figure out what it is that you're supposed to create. Um, Man, that's just, to me, that's powerful. That, if anybody's listening, I hope you guys are taking notes on that, because yeah, that's powerful. But
yeah.
talk
I
to us.
think like
Go ahead. Yeah.
yeah, I think just to add to your point there before we go into the next question, I think the probably the single most important factor that I saw in all this is that the culture was dying to own something that they can say is theirs.
Mm-hmm.
That's the most, like, for instance, when you go to Bad Bunny concert, you are proud that he's Latino. And if you go with your non-Latino friends, which I have to Bad Bunny, they're just like, fuck,
Yeah.
this guy is like
Yeah.
insane. You
Yeah.
guys are like the emotion that you see. I don't have that same emotion at a like Drake is
Yeah.
one of my favorite artists. Shout out to Champagne Papi, but
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
I don't have that same emotional
Yeah.
feeling that
That
I have
connection.
like I have at a Bad Bunny or like a J Balvin show, right? Because they are pushing culture, and in that
Mm-hmm.
same vein, I want Latinos, Latinas to feel like this is ours.
Mm-hmm.
This is representative of the culture. Like, don't stereotype me and think that
Mm-hmm.
Latinos want 55 grams of sugar in a juice,
Mm-hmm.
or that we
Yep.
need some
Yep.
like, I don't know, some cheesy jingle
Yeah.
that is like the abuela jingle that is what represents you.
Yeah.
Like we are the new generation, the Gen Zers, the millennials, like we are defining what the new Latino is, you know? So like I think that that's important, and you need to be proud, like
Mm-hmm.
this is for the culture,
Yeah.
and that's what I felt was what was missing, you know?
Mm. I love it. I love it. So go ahead and talk to us about what's in there, what's in the drink, what inspired you. Like, talk to us about the drink in itself and what inspired you to make it.
Yeah, so like in like the fall of 2018, I went to Ecuador. I hadn't been in 14 years. I was like on this journey, like kind of Indiana Jonesing it, looking for like this product. And then, I don't know if you know much about Ecuador. It's a very small country. Population is
Mm-hmm.
probably 18, 19 million people. But, geographically, it's located in the middle of the world. And what is Ecuador the best at? Because being a small country, it's hard to be number one in anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when you really look and deep dive into it, Ecuador is the most biodiverse and green country on earth by size, right? So with climate
Mm-hmm.
change and the environment and sustainability becoming so relevant, and specifically influential in this brand, I'm like, yo, that is like how we can, that is our diamond, right? So cool. I started to explore food and beverage products that were there, that were authentic, that were functional, that had like a deep history, but that I felt were crossover to the global consumer.
Mm-hmm.
I met my co-founder around that time named Juan, and we shared a lot of the same values. And, he started telling me about this beverage, and, he also believed that like Latins should not be stereotyped to sugary drinks and this, that, and the other.
Mm-hmm.
And he started telling me about this La Agua Santa that they call in the south of Ecuador. And it's like, for the people that don't speak Spanish, it's the holy water, right? And it was this water that was like mixed with botanicals. And it was 8 botanicals, and it came from this valley called Vilcabamba, that's known as the Valley of Longevity. It's a blue zone. It's right under the equator between the Amazon and the Andes. There's many centenarians there. They accredit their longevity, to this beverage. And the urban legend is, for every day you drink this, you live a day longer. So I'm like, shit, we got the fountain of youth right in the middle of the world. It is hot,
Wow.
and the special sauce of the beverage was the botanicals and the way that they're farmed. And it comes from this indigenous female farmer network down there, that they've been farming these herbs and flowers for 500 plus years, and this is how they make amines. So we started to do some more due diligence on it and see how can this be transcribed to the American market. And then 2019 we like set it all up, and we we're going to launch March of 2020. Obviously pandemic hit, global shutdown, blah blah blah. So we ended up like soft launching a few months later, just in like stores in LA and this, that, and the other. And then in that first year and a half, we really kept it small. We tried to understand, like, what do consumers want? What do they like about the brand? What do they like about like the juice itself? What is the communication that we're pushing, et cetera, et cetera. So our final version of our product is 3 grams of sugar, 20 calorie. We use real sugar. We actually use panela. So for people that are South American, panela is raw, unprocessed, unrefined sugar. If you're from Central America or Mexico and the Caribbean, they call it piloncillo. So I'm sure we've all been to Latin America at some point in our lives, and like, it's these like brown blocks of sugar that has antioxidants, contains vitamins, et cetera, et cetera. And, we use that as our sweetener. That's why, like, Chiki, if you taste it, it's very natural. We and that's it. That's the majority. 96% of the beverage outside of water itself is these botanicals, and it's certified organic, shelf stable. Depending on the retailer, we retail between $198 to $269, $289. So it's a very accessible price point. So fast forward, we saw what consumers really gravitated towards. We saw what they liked, and we've obviously tweaked and tinkered with the brand a bit, but for us, now I feel that it's ready, and now it's like going into 3,000 plus stores by the month of April. If you're in Florida, you can find us at Walmart's. We're launching in GoPuff next month. We're going to be in CVS nationwide in like 6 weeks, in the month of April as well. We're also in Giant. We sell in the Air One stores in LA, Fresh Time in the Midwest. We're in all the Dash Marts, which are part of DoorDash in California, and soon in Washington. So all in all, like 3,000 plus stores, a lot of, great independent natural stores and food service accounts. So yeah. And, for me, what's important is to try to figure out how we keep defining and engaging with our consumer, which for us, it's the Latina, millennial, Gen Zer, because we believe that she is our brand evangelist, and she is going to, tell our gospel better than anyone else. And that is what's occurring on social media. That is who is engaging with, I think that most of our consumers, I'd say, are non-Latin, but the ones that talk about it and call it 10, 20 of their friends are Latin. So for us, it's like, we're delivering that sauce. When I talk to buyers, I tell them, think about like the shelf, because we sit in the enhanced water space, which is like vitamin water, Bai, Lemon Perfect, Electrolyte, Roar, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Those guys are like, call it Drake, Harry Styles, blah, 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 right? I'm Bad Bunny, okay? Yeah. Think about it like that. And our brand is very differentiated. Our slogan is reggaeton in a bottle. Starting in the month of April, it's going to be on the front of pack. Right now it's on the side of the pack, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is the front. So we made some
Yep.
small
Yep.
tweaks to it. So in the month of April, you're going to see this redesigned a little bit. And then on the front, again, we're learning quickly as we go into more retailers. We're seeing what people are engaging with. And more importantly, we're refining our message. It's still this, it's always been the same message. It's just about how do you communicate it, And remember, like, you have a split second to convince the consumer to buy your product.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever is on this front better
That's
be
it.
hot,
Better be
because
good.
if I can't catch you in that 1 second, I may not
That's it.
catch you and you may not give me another shot.
Powerful, man. A lot of great stuff. We're coming to the top of the hour, man. It's been a pleasure talking to you about your brand. I'm curious. I mean, you're in so many different retailers. One of the last questions I want to ask you, what is the next thing? Like, I mean, do you want to continue to get into more stores? Like, what's the ceiling for a product like this?
Yeah. I mean, look, I think the universe of stores in America alone is in
Yeah.
the hundreds of thousands. So we're not even at 1% of,
Right. Right.
our potential success. So I think, to me, success is defined as being a ubiquitous brand that means something to a lot of people.
Mm.
It doesn't need to be a lot size wise, just meaning to the right audience, and that it's something that, mi gente can be proud of,
Mm-hmm.
and that they can, say that it's theirs, and that they feel proud of how we source the product. Like, I didn't even go into like how we farm our botanicals. So we
Yeah.
have our own 40-acre farm down in Ecuador. We're farming things in a regenerative manner, all organic. We create our own composting and fertilizer. We use 19 functional mushrooms. This is what we feed.
Mm.
We're feeding caviar basically to our soil, because soil is oil and soil health
Yeah.
is so important. 40% of climate change is impacted by soil quality.
Right.
So, our botanicals are the creme de la creme de la creme, um, in the botanical kind of ecosphere.
Yeah.
So, like, those are things that we want you to be proud of, and we want you to be engaged with. And, we want you to be able to find out more information, and we want to be as transparent as possible
Yeah.
about, where your products come from. So by next year, you'll be able to scan the QR code and see the day that those botanicals were planted and harvested, and the
Wow.
pictures of the farmer, all through blockchain and tracked. So yeah, so we're working on a lot of things that, that's on the impact side. There's
Mm-hmm.
also a lot of great things that are happening more on like the brand forward facing reggaeton, hee 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 ha 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 side. So yeah, I mean, it's a constant
Yeah.
evolution and innovation and just trying the best.
Yeah, I love it. Love it. Very inspiring. Very inspiring. Where can people reach out to you if they want more information about you, the product? Man, I feel like we might have to get a part two because there's a lot. I can go really deep with you, man. But where can people reach out to you, and where can people um find the product? You mentioned a couple different stores, but talk to the people.
Yeah, I'm on Instagram, Andres Izquieta. Andres, like Andres, Izquieta. Easiest way to remember how to spell it, because I've battled this my whole life, is Izquieta.
Okay.
Yeah, just DM me. And yeah, and then for Chiki, it's Drink Chiki, Chiki, on all the platforms. And what we'll do, we'll have a 25% off code for your
Ooh.
for your audience. So just type in Latin Wealth on the
Yep.
on the code, and
Got you.
that'll be active as of by the time this is live,
Yeah.
it'll be active.
Yeah, I appreciate that. This will be live 3/24.
Oh, this code will be live in an hour, so it's fine.
Okay, okay, so I'll be there for a while.
Yeah,
Cool. Who is one person that needs to be on the Latin Wealth podcast? One Latino that you feel like that needs to be on this platform?
dude, I got a lot.
You got a
Um,
list.
yeah, I got a long list.
Yeah. Let's
Yeah,
name let's
what?
name one and then you can send the list. How about that?
Yeah, big shout out to my friend Lex Borrero.
Okay.
He's actually an investor in Chiki. He's a friend of mine. He's a pioneer and an innovator in the Latin music space. He's the co-founder of Neon 16.
Mhm.
He's someone that's really inspiring, super visionary what he's doing, and he's done a great job of merging culture
Mhm.
and community. That's why, when he decided to invest in Chiki, I was super excited, because I feel like we share a lot of the same
Mm-hmm.
ideas in terms of like how the culture should be progressing.
Mm-hmm. Love that. Love that. Definitely would love to connect with them. With that
Yeah, I
being
got
said,
you.
man, thank you once again for your time. Thank you for coming on here and giving us a breakdown and everything. It means the world to us. And with that being said, it's your boy Chris. We'll catch you guys next week on the next episode. Peace.
Muchas gracias. Chiki Chiki Boom Boom.